All right, so we're going to talk about Eriogonums. And most of you don't know what an Eriogonum is, I would be willing to bet. Wild buckwheats is what they're best known as. And, well, yeah, there's a relationship. We'll get to that. But,
I actually wrote all about that in the article in the
Well,
Taos News
good.
last week.
yeah. So anyway, Eriogonums are a really spectacular, I think, family, well, not a family, but a group of plants. And let's see, it's F for
F for
forwards.
forward.
All right. So, Eriogonum, more or less, is a genus consisting of 255 species, and they're in the family Polygoniaceae. And it's the second largest family of plants, or not family, genus of plants, exclusively endemic to North America. There are more penstemons than there are Eriogonums by species, not by variety, because there are, what,
43 or 4.
43, 44 umbelatums, and about that many ovalifoliums. And I was looking through the Eriogonum manual before we left home, and I found viminiums are multitudinous as well. So when it really, really gets down to nailing down varieties, there's a lot. And the guru of penstemons and the guru of Eriogonums were Jim Reveal and for Eriogonums and
Holmgren.
Noel Holmgren for penstemons, and they used to argue about who had more plants and who was the best genus. And you know, Noel would always say, well, there are more species of penstemons, and Jim could always top him, well, there's way more varieties of Eriogonums. But you know, they both carved their teeth together in the whole botanical world, so they were great buddies. Okay, so there are larger genera, specifically Carex and Astragalus, but you can find Carex just almost anywhere, at least in the northern hemisphere, and the same for Astragalus. So Eriogonums and penstemons are primarily Western species, and even though the first Eriogonum ever described by Andre Michaud is a native of the southeastern states, just so happens that he was tramping around through the boonies in Georgia in 1700s and found this plant that hadn't been described. And you know, if any of you have ever described a plant for the first time, I haven't done that, but I know a few people who have, and it's always exciting. So he discovered a new plant. Okay, so Eriogonum itself is a made-up word. It's really simple, two Greek words, erion and goni, and they mean woolly knees. So if somebody asks, what's Eriogonum mean? You can just say, oh, woolly knees. You know. and that refers to the swollen hairy nodes that may be seen, and we'll see. Okay, so this gives you an idea of the distribution. This gives you an idea of the distribution of Eriogonums. You can see way over there in Georgia, yeah, there's a few. And there's a few in Florida and a few in Alabama, and some up in Virginia. And then when you cross the Mississippi River, they begin to become more and more and more common. And if you go far enough, well, there's an almost black spot over there in Inyo County, California, which is where the White Mountains are, and parts of maybe the upper reaches of Death Valley, and that's the bonanza spot. And if you ever get a chance to go to an Arriaga meeting when we have one in Bishop again, come with us. Join, and I'll tell you how to do that later. Okay, so there's Eriogonum tomentosum, and you know, I can't say that I can really see the woolly, but you can certainly see vaguely that it's tomentose, which means that everything is covered with fuzz. And if you're going to learn to identify these things down to the key, keying them out, you got to learn the difference between tomentose and pylos and all these other terms. Unfortunately, there are good books with pictures, and that helps a lot. So right at the beginning it says is presently constituted. Well, Dr. Reveal was convinced for a long time that one day the Eriogonums were going to go through a divorce. And instead of being one big genus, it was going to become a bunch of genera with clever names. One of them would still be Eriogonum, but then you'd get Oleogogonum and Eucycla and Micrantha and Clastomyclin and Pterogonium, my favorite, Gnisma, and Eriogonum. But he died, darn it, and so far it's still one genus, which is good for the
Was
rest
he
of us.
doing molecular genetics?
He was
or-
really in the forefront of molecular genetics. So yeah, that's a lot of how these things would be.
So that's still going on?
It's still going
may-
on.
It may yet come.
But the
as
guy
it is.
who's now doing most of the work on Eriogonums is a young taxonomist in Wisconsin, of all places. And, he's got to teach a lot of general biology classes too, so he hasn't gotten there yet. Okay. So it is, as I said before, generally considered pretty hard to identify an individual Eriogonum. The Polygonaceae are pretty easy to recognize. Some of them, like rhubarb, you know pretty well. Silver lacevine is another member of the family. Japanese knotweed, which many of us pull out of our gardens, is another member of the family. Phagopyron, which is true buckwheats, is in the same family, and of course the rumex, which is in the sorrels. And they all have some things, well, of course they have things in common, or they wouldn't be in the same family. But they all have pretty simple, toothless leaves, no spines, no palmately pinnate and bipinnate and all of that stuff. Doesn't exist. And typically, but not always, the joints are swollen. And they have, relatively speaking, pretty small flowers. And they're in clusters or in spikes or on racemes. But there's more, way more, but that's enough. And you will begin to recognize them when you start looking for families. I noticed one of your programs was supposed to be an ID in families. Really, really good idea.
I did that last month.
Yeah.
Quick and dirty.
Okay. Whoops. Did I hit the wrong? No, I didn't. Okay. Eriogonums, just to add to the confusion, they could be annuals, and a lot of, I think the Gnismas are annuals. They're occasionally biennial. There's one or two monocarpic species. Everybody would know what a monocarp is. An agave is a monocarp. You know what an agave does? It lives for a number of years, stores up enough energy, and all of a sudden, boom, it shoots up and it flowers,
And then dies.
and pregnancy is fatal. Okay, so that's a monocarp. One produces seed once. Okay, so they can be perennial, herbaceous, woody, or shrubby, and the heights of the plants will vary from little tiny things that are only that tall and be perfect in troughs to a few that might get 5 or 6 feet tall. And flower color is almost, well, before they're pollinated, is almost always white or some color of yellow. And so you can't, some species of plants, well, they're red, so we can identify them by that. Well, that doesn't help much with Eriogonums because you got 255 species, and well, before they're pollinated, they're pretty much all white or yellow. Okay, but something happens when the individual flower is pollinated, and it's a really cool process. A head might have 100 flowers in it. Well, each flower opens on its own schedule. They don't all open at once. One might open before all the others. And each flower has a 3-day cycle. On the first day, the flower opens up, and the pollen segments are exposed. And they spew pollen out in case any female flowers, preferably on a whole different plant, are available, and boom, pollination happens. End of the first day, flower closes up. And it didn't get pollinized, of course, because it was a male flower. Second day, it opens up a little wider, and the male parts and the female parts are both exposed. But they won't cross-pollinate. And so they're both out there advertising to all the world. Here I am, I'm pristine white, okay? More or less. And then on the third day, the whole thing opens up again. And if nothing pollinates it, at the end of the third day when the flower closes back up, it pollinates itself. Eriogonums are determined to get pollinated. They'll do it however it can be done. But they're trying to send their pollen elsewhere, and they're trying to get pollen from elsewhere because obviously that's in their biological best interest, to have biological diversity. Okay, so...
When did they change color?
And we'll get to that.
Oh, okay.
You know,
Okay.
what I'm telling you first, then I'm going to show you some pictures.
Okay.
Okay, so Eriogonum is represented by arguably 39 to 45 species. Depends on your source. And Taos, Rio Arriba, and San Juan counties have 10, 8, and at least 18 species in San Juan. I know that when the Arriaga Society went out there and we had our annual meeting based out of Farmington, we identified, well, that was part of the process of identifying a new species. Whether it was in New Mexico or whether it was in Arizona is a matter of half a mile. And it might very well be on the New Mexico side of the line as well. And I was looking through there today and looking at a map and figured that I have a photograph in here of one that's not listed for San Juan County, but I photographed it in San Juan County. And it was identified by at least 2 or 3 authorities who know what they're talking about. So, Eriogonums are considered a challenge to identify. Any of you have Floridea mexicana, you know, and if you don't have it, get it. You get your own individual copy printed specifically for you. You can't buy it just in the bookstore. You can buy it from Amazon for about twice what it costs to get a new one. So don't bother with that. Even better are the manuals that you get when you go to the Eriogonum annual meetings. The best one that ever came out was one of Dr. Reveal's last. Took 3 volumes bigger than this because it had all the Eriogonums and it had pretty much every location citation that had ever been cited and several photographs. Now, of course, it all fits on a thumb drive, or because you're not going to take these 3 volumes out in the field. But I don't know about you, but working from a thumb drive on a little computer thing, or worse, a telephone in the field, is kind of hopeless. Okay, and anyway, so James L. Reveal started doing that, and it's a wonderful manual, but you can only get them by going to the annual meetings of the Eriogonum Society, so you got to join. Now, I am the membership chairman, so I'm biased. And now Dr. Ben Grady is he's the appointed successor as guru for things Eriogonum, and he's a really cool young man. And it's really nice to have some young, enthusiastic botanists with you out in the field, because botany, if you don't know, is a dying field of study. I'm really happy to hear that in high school they're using plant presses, because there's very, very few colleges that teach taxonomy anymore, because they do it all with DNA. Okay, so first we're going to see some examples. This is an annual. How would you know it was an annual? Well, probably because you'd grab it and pull it and it would pop right out of the ground. That would be an annual. This is bird's nest. It's all over parts of California and Nevada. It's a really cool looking plant. One of these days I'll establish it. I'll just probably have to throw the seeds out and we'll get a nice winter and poof, it'll grow. And it'll be a weed. But a really cool weed, you know. So anyway, that's bird's nest, Eriogonum or nidularum. They can be perennial, Eriogonum umbulatum, of which there are at least 40 varieties, is, I would say, the prototypical perennial Eriogonum. It's essentially evergreen. Yeah,
Is that, it looks like what we see a lot of in Taos. Is that,
probably not, well, it depends. If you see it in gardens, very likely. It's the most common Eriogonum sold in the United States.
Oh, is that Canna Creek?
Well, that's not Canna Creek, but Canna Creek is an umbulatum.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, now, there is another one that is native to this particular area, which looks a lot like that, except the flower color typically is a little whiter. And we'll get to that one. But, yeah, Eriogonum umbulatum is probably the most common one you're going to see in gardens, period. Whoops, back to crustose. So crustose. So you can tell how big that one is by the scale. This is Eriogonums. It only occurs near, well, let's see, Red Canyon, Bryce Canyon, right near Bryce Canyon. And that's the only place it exists, pretty much. And you can tell by the penny how tall the plant really is. It just grows, and over the years it grows a little taller, and everything underneath is pretty much dead. So, yeah, the plant itself is, you know, not any taller than a penny. It is crustose. It is crusty. It's just a crust. And it swells because it accumulates dirt. Okay, or a subshrub like Hirmanii variety sulcata, one of my favorites again. And this is in the not the White Mountains, the
Mount Charles.
Mount Charleston in the Spring Mountains, 20-some miles west of Las Vegas, Nevada. You wouldn't think when you're in Las Vegas that there is a mountain wonderland only 25, 30 miles away from you with some of the rarest plants you're ever going to see anywhere. And it's a cool place. And they even have their own ski area. And there was more snow there 2 weeks ago than there was here.
Yes, there was.
There was. I don't know that they've got any now either. But anyway, that's a subshrub. Whoops. Yeah, and see, that's the way it leaves out. So it is deciduous. And those are the leaves coming out. That's my plant. So, you know, but the leaves, it looks totally dead, just a little mangled mess of prickly stems, and then it's got all these cute little leaves. And then they go through their white phase, and then they get pollinated and they turn orange. Okay, and then shrubby like Eriogonum corymbosum. And that can be a pretty good sized shrub. Ours is, so tall, so big around, and then I cut the heck out of it every year or two, so it doesn't get any bigger, but, you know.
Would you find that in southern Utah?
Yes, this picture was probably, well, I know where it was. We were driving through, from Hanksville headed for Lake Powell.
Okay, I've got a picture of a beautiful, almost rounded
Yeah.
shrub on the shores of Lake Powell. We
Yeah.
did a kayaking trip one time, and the leaves, the plants, the flowers were almost waxy.
Yep,
That's probably it.
could very
I
well
have
be.
wondered for years what that
And
thing
we will
was.
see another
What a
picture of
beautiful
corymbosum coming later, and maybe it'll be even closer to yours. Okay. Some of them have only basal foliage and really cool looking plants like inflatum.
how
Yeah,
big is it?
Inflatum,
that can get like 3 feet
it can
tall.
get 3 feet tall. It
Yeah.
can stay pretty low. It's a really, really cool plant, and it took a long time to figure out why they were inflated. You know, they thought, well, maybe there's a bug that makes it swell up. No. This plant does all its photosynthesis at night. It's typically pretty much a real hot desert plant, although it grows beautifully in Santa Fe.
What about here?
And it would probably grow here in a very warm spot. But inflatum is in fact storing up carbon dioxide inside that gas chamber, and then during the night it conducts its photosynthesis. It's not the only plant that does that. There's a lot of desert plants from Africa that do the same thing. but this is one of ours.
And I like that one of the common names is desert trumpet.
Desert trumpets, yes. And it's a cool plant.
Orange, looks like,
Those are the basil leaves.
okay.
You know, they come up, they're green, and then every year all the leaves just, you know, fry off and all that's left is this thing. And sometimes, well, this year we saw a couple that had 3 levels of swollen inflations. It was pretty cool.
And the flowers are just at the very, very tip of
The
the
flowers are
tiniest-
just at the very, very top, and they're ridiculously small.
Backbone.
Yeah, so most Eriogonums have this sort of complex compound flowering head. This is Eriogonum cespitosum, which is pretty well represented all over the Intermountain West. It gets a little confusing between that and ovalifolium, but ovalifolium is a little more oval and not quite a stretch, and cespitosum basically means stemless, so it's sitting right on the crust of the earth. But that's cespitosum, and it's got, you can see there's a lot of flowers in each one of those heads. F for forwards, okay. But not all Eriogonums have that complex compound head. This is Eriogonum deflexum. This is an annual. Whoops. Okay, we'll get it. There you go. Each flower is one flower all by itself. And that's I really like these things. I haven't succeeded in establishing a lot of these annual crazy Eriogonums in my garden yet, but one day I will. Okay. So, whether it's an annual, perennial, crustose, subshrub, shrubby, basil, whether it has colleen leaves, simple like area to inflate them, or whatever. Basically, the flower in all cases has this perianth, this complex, where the sepals and petals are pretty much united into one organism. And the seed is called an achene. It's kind of a hard little nut. When it's a buckwheat, you call it a groat. And basically, the seeds of all members of the Polygoniaceae are more or less the same. Some of them are so heavily covered with fuzz you can't strip them. In Eriogonums, usually they will have a little tail. Looks like the tail broke off of these. And if you break that tail off, germinators, it isn't going to germinate. So be careful when you clean your seeds.
Yeah, the tails are gone.
The tails are gone, it won't germinate. But, you can pretty much clean this. You just rub those things gently and the seeds come out of that dried up perianth. So, your unfertilized flowers are typically white or yellow. And they get, as we described, they get pollinated individually. Because every one of those flowers that's open might be in a different stage. And this is Eriogonum ovalifolium williamsi, which is it's a very rare Eriogonum. It only grows in a set of hot springs south of Lake Tahoe, and unfortunately, post office built a post office on about half of the plants.
Oh, that's where they are.
That's where they are, yeah. And it's a really, really cool little species. But the rest of them are kind of protected, which is a good thing. Okay, and then they get pollinated, and they do that. This is Grassolepes, which grows up high in the mountains, in the White Mountains of California. Beautiful, beautiful. And those strawberry or raspberry pink flowers, those are all pollinated. What they're doing, in effect, is telling the bugs to go away. We've had enough, we're pregnant, go away. And that's exactly what the bugs understand. They're white, like the one in the background, when they haven't been pollinated at all. And here it is on Ovalifolium rubidum. And rubidum is another variety that became identified due to one of our Eriogonum meeting trips. This grows only on Steens Mountain in southeastern Oregon. And if you haven't been to the Steens, put it on your must-go list, because you got this block fault mountain like this. This side drops down about, 4,000 or 5,000 feet
Something like that.
to the Alvord Desert, which is the second driest place in North America. And remember, you're in Oregon. You didn't know Oregon was that dry, but the Alvord Desert, the only place drier than the Alvord Desert is Death Valley. Okay, so this is Ovalifolium rubidum. And this is Umbulatum, and it hasn't been pollinated at all yet because it's all yellow. And then when they get pollinated, they begin to change color. Now this is Arcuatum. This is the one I said is not listed in the plants of San Juan County, but when I just checked the map and I know where I photographed that, I think this should be in the San Juan County list. So I'm going to say it is. So they have at least 19 now, not 18. But Arcuatum is a beautiful plant. So Eriogonum elatum is found in all 3 counties. It is one of the very, very few monocarpic species. It will have that basal rosette for a number of years, 3, 5. In a year like this, probably none of them are going to bloom because they didn't store up enough energy over the winter to bloom. And then when it does, it'll put up a spike, 5, maybe 6 feet tall, and it'll bloom, and it's got bright yellow flowers. And they're unique because they have keels on the seeds. So if you see a tall, spiky plant with keels on the seed, the perianth, and it's grown in a hot, dry place, it's probably elatum. And of course, elatum means tall. Sometimes the names make sense. So annuum, strangely enough, is normally a biennial. It occurs in Taos and Rio Arriba County in wetter locations. It's not one of our desert Eriogonums at all. Clavellatum grows only in San Juan and probably only way over in the extreme corner, right in Navajo country, certainly. Very, very dry places. And that's one of the pictures that's not as good as some others, but there are just not very many pictures of this plant because it's not well photographed, noted.
How big is that?
Probably so tall, so big around. In a good year. There's your Corymbosum from San Juan County. It's in Taos and Rio Arriba, not in San Juan. And this picture was taken along the road down to Lake Powell. So very well could have been what you saw. It's called crisp leaf. The leaves will be, they're entire, but they're kind of crisp and wavy a little bit. But no points, no hairs sticking out, nothing like that. And this is Divaricatum. It's only in San Juan County. Now again, that's right out there near Red Valley. And Red Valley is right on the Arizona-New Mexico border. So it is, I know where that was photographed. And when we were out there photographing, people just kept picking up all these cool little rocks because all of those are petrified wood. And we found a new species entirely near there. And then Arnold Clifford, if you've ever had Arnold for a talk, he's phenomenal. He's a Navajo that lives out there. He found at least one more species right down the road, which he named for his grandma, but it's in Arizona, so it didn't make this list. Eriogonum effusum, maybe it's a species, and it is from San Juan County, and maybe it's just one more variety of Corymbosum. If somebody wants to do a big complex study, there's one that deserves it. Gordonii is another really pretty short one from San Juan County. San Juan County probably has the most interesting of all of the Eriogonums because they have the ones that grow in the Badlands in the really unbelievably terrible soils, and those somehow just make the character of the plant more and more exciting. If you grow them up in the mountains, they're cool, but they're just somehow not as not as cool as hooker eye. You know, look at that soil. That looks like a 2 for pot to me. And that's only from San Juan as well. And there's inflatum, which does occur in San Juan County. And that's probably about typical size, which is about knee-high, yes.
How do you propagate that?
From seed. That's generally speaking, except for a few of the Eriogonum, come on, senior moments. Canna Creek
Okay.
is umbulatum.
That's an umbulatum.
The area, umbulatums, a lot of those are grown from cuttings, but most don't even try. Now, that doesn't mean you can't do it, but generally they're easy enough to grow from seed that you can collect. The trick is finding the seeds, recognizing the seeds, because the seeds, like on inflatum, are really pretty small.
Can you get them through the store?
Can you get them through stores? Absolutely not. I know how you can get them. You can join the Arriaga Society and you can get them through the seed exchange. Set me up, didn't you? Yeah,
If you have a plant, will it self-seed and spread in your yard?
most of the time.
Most of the time it will?
Yeah,
Okay.
they will self-fertilize if forced to. Some will spread all over. Some won't do it so much. I've had an Eriogonum jamesii in my garden since mid 80s. And it still it's gotten bigger, but it hasn't
So
produced
you
any children.
You wouldn't necessarily have to have two of the same
No,
variety
no.
either.
They can self
You can sell.
if all else fails. That's their third day of pollination for each seed, is the third day. If all else fails, I want to survive. A lot of these plants you've seen are in hostile enough environments that, you know, once it gets started, that may be the only way it's going to get pollinated any given year. But anyway, inflatum is a really cool plant and has little tiny seeds, and I
Way up at the
suspect,
tippy top of
yeah,
those things.
right at the top. And of course, most of the time when you go to collect them, all you get is bracts and garbage, and you didn't get the seeds. But you could. Sometimes we do. This is jamesii. This is the one that's very common in this county and in Rio Arriba County. This is antelope brush or whatever. Not antelope bitter brush, but antelope sage. That's what it's called, antelope sage. It's not a sage at all, of course. It is, in fact, an Eriogonum. And what makes jamesii particularly easy to identify from the umbulatums is you turn the leaf over. The bottom of the leaf is pretty darn hairy, and the bottom side of umbulatum leaves is usually not. The flower on jamesii varies from yellow in some varieties to in jamesii, sort of a creamy white. And what I really, really like about this plant is in the winter, it turns the most gorgeous mahogany red. So it is an evergreen, but it's not green when it's in its winter phase. It's a really beautiful mahogany red. And that one's easy to cultivate and generally available from specialists. And certainly you can go collect your own seed. We collected our seed of this up near Tres Piedras 40-some years ago. We've been growing it from that clone ever since. Lacnoginum is a very rare Eriogonum, lives on, I think, the western edge of the canyon, and that's the only place it lives outside of somewhere down south. So it's not a very common one. But if you go climbing around the canyon edge and you see a flower that looks like that, with leaves that are hairy and pointed like that, well, maybe it's an Eriogonum lacnoginum, and you found a pretty rare plant. Microthecum is a pretty common Eriogonum. It's a low shrubby thing, finely divided foliage, nice leaves, but it grows in a lot of environments, including pretty heavy forested pine forests, or the sand deserty environment, which this one is probably out near Farmington.
Is it the white or the yellow flower?
It's the white flowers, absolutely. The yellow flowers are, who knows which DYC. But and ovalifolium also grows in San Juan County. Ovalifolium, there's 30-some varieties. They're gorgeous. They're just beautiful. And look at the changes. This with white flowers, they end up in the red phase in this one. And then we saw that rubidum, and there's a lot of others. Farnesioides, well, this one's going to be up in your mountains. And the stems are just these wispy little wiry things. And so you could easily overlook it, and easily, if it wasn't blooming, you would, that's not a penstemon, that's just some kind of little weedy, or Eriogonum, it's just some kind of little weedy thing. But go look at it, because look, there's some other foresty plants right behind it. And racemosum you will see, again, all over the northern counties of the state. And racemosum grows about so tall. Its flowers are conveniently a raceme, which that means they're organized on a vertical spike. And that's why it got its name, but it's a pretty common one. I know there's a lot of it around Angel Fire in particular. A friend of mine who used to have relatives in Angel Fire would go there from Oregon every year and send me pictures of whenever she found them. Scabrellum is another one of those strange plants from out in San Juan County. Grows on this slope, which is sort of a shale garbage. And, it's a pretty good sized shrub. It was about that tall that year and about so big around. But that's what it really looks like when you get up close. It's just nothing much to it. The leaves are insignificant and the flowers are tiny and solitary. And there are real leaves down at the base. You see those little green things down at the base there. That's what it, so, a lot of different kinds. Shockley, again, in the San Juan County, although the San Juan County Shockley's have white flowers. This one is in Nevada. This is Baking Powder Flats. Yeah, how can I forget that name? White sandy crud. I'm not sure what that soil even is, but it does look like baking powder. And you can see from the scale, there's an old GPS unit of mine on top of that plant. We spent a lot of time looking for these out there in baking powder flat, because when Jim Reveal was a young man, he found one that was about 6 feet across.
Wide.
And so everybody had to keep looking to see if they could find one that big again. Nobody did. But, there's a whole nother story. He was tromping all over that place, and he kept stepping over a plant, and he paid no attention to it, because it wasn't the Eriogonums that he was looking for. Well, it turns out it's a really beautiful pink penstemon, and its name is Immanifestus, which basically means in Latin unrevealed, because Dr. Holmgren was making fun of this guy because he stomped on it practically and never noticed it. So that's how plants get named sometimes. Subreniforme is another San Juan County one. Kidney-shaped little green leaves at a base, But obviously it doesn't, I suspect we were very, very lucky to see that at that particular moment. And then, 2 months later, you wouldn't see anything except dried up spike. Weatherilii, for the Weatherill brothers that, pretty much were instrumental in Mesa Verde, well, they were also plant freaks. And that's another one out there in those badlands right there near UNM-Taos. Variety is a pretty common one. This particular variety is not from New Mexico. That's from near Bishop, California, on a slope, scoria slope. White plants that from a distance they just look like dried cow pies. That's what they look like. And then you go up close and, oh, there's cool little white flowers on there, which then turn pink. But it is in Taos County, and you can find it around here if you look. And boom, that's that. So, do we have questions about Eriogonums?
What's the pollinator?
What's the pollinators? Well, it varies. Generally speaking, bees. I've seen bees pollinate Eriogonums. I've seen ants like crazy pollinate Eriogonums. There are a group of moths. You may have seen a commercial on TV from some oil company talking about their buckwheat that they had to set aside all this land for, and it was because it was the only place where these blues, which are pretty small, beautiful little butterflies, the only plant they pollinate or get their pollen from is an Eriogonum. Typically with Eriogonums, it's not like Asclepias or the yuccas, which have a really intricate relationship between the insect and the plant. Most of the Eriogonums can get by just fine with any pollinator, but some of these blues, the Euphaloides they are called, are bound to a species of Eriogonum, so it's the other end of the complex. Plants are generalists, the bugs are specialists in that case. So, you know, but pollinators, they, interestingly enough, the most common Eriogonum in California, and I can't remember its name at the moment, is the most important bee plant in the state. And if you drive up and down pretty much any of the highways in Southern California, you're going to see it. But like a lot of other things, they grabbed the wrong variety and planted it all along all the highways. So, you know, you drive along the highways around Santa Fe and you see penstemon palmeri. Well, there was never a penstemon palmeri grew anywhere near Santa Fe, not before the highway departments put it there. And California did the same thing with this particular Eriogonum. It's a very common Eriogonum, and it grows in most of those places, but the specific variety they planted is the wrong variety in many cases. Not that the bees care.
And that you said earlier, sticky?
Sticky.
Are their leaves sticky?
Not usually.
Okay.
Can't think of any that have we ever touched a sticky leafed Eriogonum?
No,
I can't
haven't.
think of any. Yeah, when we have a meeting, you know, the first day pretty much of all of our meetings, Dr. Reveal and now Dr. Ben bring in this whole big cooler full of plants that they collected, and they lay them out all on these tables, and then we all get to spend a whole day trying to identify them. And they teach us every year all of the terms we need to know, and a lot of things. Well, I will say a lot of it, it's a judgment call. I didn't show you a picture of a stipe, but one of the keys to identifying a lot of penstemons, breaking them down into all those subgenera you saw, is whether it's stipitate or not. Well, each flower, well, not each flower, but many flowers have a little joint somewhere where it comes out, and it has a little thing that looks like a joint. It's a little swollen node. And then you're supposed to figure out whether that really is a swollen node or a stipe or not. Some of the flowers come directly out of the base. Some of them have a little tiny, a stipe is basically a little substem.
It's a little ring.
You know, yeah, and it forms a ring where the stipe and the flower join together. And so that's your first identification question, is it stipitate? And we've had arguments go on between members for hours on whether it's stipitate or not. And the same is true, the petals and the sepals form the flower. And for other species, the question is whether the three petals are the same size as the three sepals, because they always have three of each, or whether one set is much larger than the other. And there's a specific term for that too. And you have to know that term, because then you get an argument over whether it's dimorphic or monomorphic. And, you know, if you don't know what it means, it's pointless. And, you know, we had that argument over one little flower for hours. And I took a photograph from about that far away, and then I blew it way up, and we decided it was dimorphic. But up until that time, nobody was quite sure. Except, of course, Dr. Ben, because he knew what it was. But anyway, you know, it's a lot of fun. Eriogonums are cool. Whether you just grow them, whether you just see them in the mountains, or whether you become the next specialist, and you can do that. So, any more? Yes, a couple of questions.
Can the seeds be used as grains?
They could be.
Like-
There
the common?
There
buckwheat?
are ethnobotanic records of the seeds of some species being used in the diet of peoples long ago and far away,
I think I read,
mostly in the Great Basin.
yeah, pollens or seeds have been found at some archaeological
Oh, yeah,
sites.
yes.
Okay.
So they do have ethnobotanic uses. And of course, the Navajos have other medicinal uses for many of the Eriogonums. Yeah.
How many of these do you have for sale on your shelf?
This year, probably not more than 6 or 8 species. Some years we have a lot, some years they just don't germinate. Some years life rears its head. You know, if you're a germinator of wildflowers, and you know, that was an interesting discussion we had before. You know, you think you know what you're doing, and you plant them, and then reality humiliates you almost every other time. And some years they germinate. You know, the annuals, well, I'm just going to harvest the seeds, and then I'm going to throw them out. And then if we have a good winter, they'll come up. The polycladon, which is one of the ones that's common in Santa Fe County, is an annual. And in a good spring, I will have a couple of thousand little gray seedlings that come up, and then I just start pulling out half of them at least, and then if it doesn't rain, then I don't have to pull out too many more, because only 10 or a dozen survive. But those 10 or a dozen produce a couple of thousand seedlings all over again. So, you know, the annuals are really cool, and some of them are really unique, like that bird's nest. It just looks like a little red nest upside down
Is
on the
that
ground.
what you often see on the side of the road or in a gravel area, and they are just kind of dried, especially in the fall, dried, reddish, brown, fine?
Looking things, they could be.
Yeah,
If you're in
they're
the
all
right
just
place,
dried up,
yeah.
Just,
If you go around Lake Tahoe, I'd be willing to bet that's what you saw. Or if you drove through Esmeralda County, Nevada, yeah, that's what you saw. You know, yeah, that's what a lot, and there are other species like that as well,
okay.
yeah.
And is the bloom, if they're in Taos County, let's say, is the bloom typically like late spring or midsummer, or when would you normally see them blooming?
Depends on the species.
Oh, okay. So
It
they're all
depends
over.
entirely on the species and the habitat. The mountain species, of course, are going to bloom later. The more deserty it is, typically, the earlier it's going to bloom. But what makes Eriogonums cooler than most other wildflowers is it doesn't really matter whether it's truly in bloom or not, because the flower doesn't look any different except for color. Because those seeds, those fertilized seeds, will persist on the plant well into fall. So it's a great foundational plant in your garden, because although it changes color from germination or coming up and first pollination to end of the season, there's always something to look at. A lot of perennials, when they're done blooming, you know, if they don't have nice foliage, they're not much. And you know, at least that way you can identify immediately. If you're a penstemon specialist, you get really good at identifying flowers from dried up, you know, identifying species from dried flowers. You have to rehydrate them, and you try and open them up without destroying them and looking at all the sex organs and all that. In Eriogonums, it doesn't matter, because they're still all there. You know, they dry up in perfect form until you crunch them.
we saw the racemosa certainly in July and August.
Oh yeah, racemose is very common in July and August. And so would be rhytii in some places, and a couple of others. But, you know, a lot of those pictures, well, We did our annual meeting in Farmington, and that was in September, I think, or late August.
September, mid-September.
Yeah, it was in September because roasted chilies were just coming on. We planned it that way. All the out-of-state people had to smell the roasted chilies.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's Eriogonums.
Great.
Any other questions? We thank Bob for coming and bringing his extra memory bank, his wife cheated.
I would be lost without her. Yeah, and Eriogonum is just eriogonum.org, you know, it's easy. And you can join us.